Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Mr. Lee and the organising committee for inviting me to speak here today and giving me another opportunity to come back to Korea and visit your beautiful country again. I'm really honoured to be here today in your company. We're making history today because this is the first time ever that there's been a joint presentation between the SCAA and SCAE. So this is a first. And I can tell you now it's going to be either very, very good or very bad. So I'd just like to say that we're changing the format slightly. We will be talking about the European coffee market and about the American coffee market, but we're also going to be spending quite a bit more time discussing and just trying to discover a little bit more about the definition of specialty coffee.
Excellent. Oh, do you have the clicker? Do you have it? 안녕하세요. Thank you very much for having us here. My name is Ellie Hudson. I'm the Director of Professional Development for SCAA, the Specialty Coffee Association of America. We are a global coffee association with members all around the world, including many people in this room. We are known probably most for the show that we produce, also the education and standards for coffee.
Okay, Specialty Coffee Association of Europe, shortly known by SCAA. We are SCAA. Just tell you a little bit about our association for a few moments. We were founded just like Lucy's company. Lucy was saying earlier in 1998. We were founded in 1998. So we have just celebrated our 15th anniversary, which is illustrated by this not very good piece of latte art on the picture that you see there. Where we have members in a country who are active, we form a chapter. And we now have, although we have members in 70 countries in Europe and around the world, we have a chapter formed in 30 countries, including a very, very active chapter here in Korea. We have at this point 1,500 members spread about those 70 countries. And our members represent all parts of our industry, from farmers and growers through to exporters, coffee traders, coffee machine manufacturers, roasting manufacturers, coffee roasters, baristas, coffee shops, and trainers as well. So right across the spectrum of the specialty coffee industry. Together with SCAA, we run through our sister or daughter organisation, World Coffee Events. We organise and run 7 World Championships. So the first one is the one which has been going the longest, which is the World Barista Championship. We also have World Latte Art Championship, World Brewers Cup, Ibrik, Sebze Ibrik, which is Turkish coffee, World Cup Tasters Championship, the World Coffee in Good Spirits Championship, and the last one which had its first showing in Nice in France earlier on this year, and that's the World Coffee Roasting Championship. Up to 2012, we, through our education system, which is one of our main activities, we certified 5,000 baristas around the world. At that point, we introduced our coffee diploma system, which is the latest iteration of our education program, at three different levels, and we deliver that through authorised trainers. And at this moment, well, when this slide was put together, we had 390 authorised trainers. Anne-Marie, our education coordinator, who sat on the front row here, has been very busy in Asia these past few weeks, and we now probably have something like 430 or 440 authorised trainers, many of whom are in Korea and this part of the world also. We did have 149 authorised trainers in Korea. That has now changed and is probably near 170 or 180. One of them is Song-il Choi there, who some of you may recognise and know. We have so far issued, since we introduced our coffee diploma system in June of 2012, 13,000 coffee diploma certificates across our range of modules, which is barista skills, roasting, grinding and brewing, green coffee, and sensory skills. And we have, there we go. Our certificates, as well as being a certification in themselves, also carry points which go up to making 100 points, which allows our students to to gain our diploma. And we've so far awarded exactly 100 coffee diplomas since we started our coffee diploma system. One of our other activities is to have our own event every year in different cities in Europe, World of Coffee. Next year it's going to be in Rimini in Italy. We've just been to Nice in France and Vienna the year before, and we do educational workshops, we have an exhibition, we have seminars, we have a conference similar to this, and many other activities. That's just a brief outline of our activity to date, and I think it's over to you now.
So, like I mentioned in the introduction, you can see some snapshots here of what we are as the SCAA. Many of these are photographs from our exhibition, which is the largest coffee show in the world. And you can see photographs of different stands as well as education, exchanging ideas. We recently launched an e-learning program, which I hope is interesting to those in the room that would be available or interested in participating in online education. And one of the new programs that we'll be doing shortly is becoming accredited by an official institution as authorized by the ISO. So that will mean SCAA will be the first coffee association in the world to be an accredited education service provider. So stay tuned for that. We also have many publications, newsletters. We have the SCAA Chronicle. About 2 years ago, we hired a coffee science manager and have been developing more research and also working with World Coffee Research to really look at some of the more scientific and scholarly pursuits in the coffee industry. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about specialty coffee and the state of specialty coffee in the world. But before we can do that, we need to make sure that we know what we mean when we say specialty coffee or specialty coffee. So what I'd like to ask each of you to do is to go ahead and take out a piece of paper and a pen, or take out your iPad or your iPhone or whatever it is that you can write down some ideas. And I want you to take a minute and in your own words, go ahead and just write down, and you're not going to have to share this, but just take a moment and write down how you define specialty coffee and what does it mean to you. No wrong answers. So we'll give you just a few seconds to do this. Now, because this is the session after lunch and we don't want people falling asleep, please turn to your neighbor if you'd like. And we're hoping that you could take about maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little less than that, and share and discuss your definitions. So maybe it's a little bit similar, maybe it's different, and then we're going to kind of ask you some questions about that. So let's go ahead. We could, if you have, if there's music to play, if we could get the music playing, and then when we cut it off, that will be the signal that time is up. You can go ahead and start wrapping up your discussion.
I'd just like to say that Ellie said that you were going to keep this to yourselves. She actually lied. You can't keep it to yourselves. We're going to ask you in a few moments to, if you would, please, to share some of your thoughts and ideas with us and with the rest of the audience.
So let's just see, as a show of hands, does your definition of specialty coffee talk about it like it's a beverage? Anybody? Something brewed, something prepared by a barista? Okay, a couple people. What about a green coffee standard? Does your definition include a couple green coffee standard? See that a little bit more. What about the idea that it's a process? And what we mean by that is that it's, usually people say like it's grown. Yeah, I see a couple of hands. Grown and then cared for, and the way that it's bought and sold has some sort of ethical treatment or sustainability. See definitely a lot more hands for that. What about a community? Is specialty coffee a community? Anybody think it is or not? All right, good. So we seem like, and As expected, we had a range of answers that spread across several very different categories. So it makes it so that it's reasonable for us to ask, why on earth do we have so many definitions? We went to find some answers to this, and first we wanted to consult the existing literature on the subject between SCAA and SCAA about how we define coffee or specialty coffee officially. This is you.
So the background to this is that the debate has been going on for some time. There are already certain definitions. SCAA have a definition, SCA have a definition. They're completely different. We've been engaging people in this debate, and all sorts of different ideas have been coming forward. It's for me, as the Executive Director of the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe, not having a clear definition of our core product gives me a little bit of a problem. But of course, you know, it's all very subjective, and it's such a big subject that you know, we wonder if we can actually all agree on a definition, which is part of the reason why we're going through this exercise now. So we just thought we would share with you some of the existing ideas that there are, or definitions that there are for specialty coffee. So Erna Knutson of Knutson Coffee Limited said, quite simple, special geographic microclimates produce beans with unique flavour profiles. And those specialty coffee beans should always be well prepared, freshly roasted and properly brewed. And those particular phrases have gone into the Specialty Coffee Association of America's definition of specialty coffee. The Specialty Coffee Association of America also talk about certain metrics within their definition. So a certain percentage of the market for imported coffee into the United States is defined as being specialty coffee. On the other hand, the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe takes a completely different view. Specialty coffee is defined as a crafted quality coffee-based beverage which is judged by the consumer in a limited marketplace at a given time to have unique quality, a distinct taste and personality different from and superior to the common coffee beverages offered in that marketplace at that time. The beverage is based on beans that have been grown in an accurately defined area and which meet the highest standards for green coffee and for its roasting, storage and brewing. So we're talking about all of the processes, all of the stages of the processing, all the way through from planting the tree all the way through to producing the coffee, with a specific emphasis on the taste in the cup. Andre Elson is the general manager of KLD Coffee, who are part of the Neumann Group, and he's our national coordinator in Russia. Says that specialty coffee is a coffee that has outstanding organoleptic characteristics and such that during its delivery from the branch to the cup, the following characteristics have been met. The beans have been grown correctly and harvested at the right time. It's been processed correctly, and the coffee is being delivered fresh to the consumer. The beans have been roasted correctly so that all of their flavour characteristics have been preserved. The end product is quality packaging. The beverage has been prepared with love. At every stage of this long process, the parties involved have observed all the moral norms.
So we went ahead and took on an informal survey of SCAA members, SCAE members, and participants in the community from around the world. And we asked them 2 questions. And part of it was this first exercise that we asked you to do, which was basically defining specialty coffee. And the results that came in from the responses that they gave, we sort of organized them into a couple different themes. Here, do you want me to take the clicker? Excuse me. So number 1, there was a technical aspect, and I think some of you raised your hands for specialty coffee is defined as a type of beverage or a green coffee standard. We had a number of responses. This one was from an SCAA board member who is also a roaster wholesaler, a large specialty roaster wholesaler, and kind of discussed a very basic definition according to the standards. This response was from an SCAE national coordinator and importer, and same kind of thing, just a very simple definition referring to the actual score on the 100-point scale and some very specific parameters to meet. We had a couple of responses that focused on specialty coffee, defining it as a beverage. And those that did, these are actual direct quotes from the responses. One of these was from an SCAA member in New Zealand, and the other was from the same SCAE national coordinator from the previous page. And I think they're pretty self-explanatory. And I think that also, I really like this word tasty. I think that it's sort of an informal word, but we know what it means when we hear it. There were some that expanded on this a little bit. There were a couple different roasters and baristas that responded in these particular comments, and you can see them here. A little bit more focus on the consumer, about whether the beverage is good or not is not about how I make it, it's how the consumer responds to it. So that was sort of slightly different perspective on that. And then again, kind of looking at this last one, flavors and textures that make me pause and say, something that not everything can do, but you know that when you encounter it. Those respondents that talked about a process, we had a couple of quotes here. One was this idea of ethically sourced, and you saw that in one of the previous definitions from the literature that was also offered. I think just a very simple definition. And then here we see the appearance of this word education, which is something that comes up a lot when we talk about what makes specialty coffee distinct from all coffee. And this was from actually an SCAE board member and equipment manufacturer, this one here that says, which should always be a collaborative effort, sharing of knowledge and not hoarding it. So this had to do with the process, but also she kind of focused on the community effort, that it's really an industry effort to educate and not to be competitive about it. And then finally, this word geeky, I wasn't surprised to see that appear. We definitely know that the members of the specialty coffee community can get really excited about things that maybe other people might not. Finally, this idea of community came up over and over and over again. And this was where we talked about, we saw quotes where people would focus on the word movement came up, this idea that we would be constantly evolving and constantly striving towards improvement. And that it's something that's hard to define because it's always changing. And then finally, this idea that there is, the heart is the people was the statement, and I think that that was something that I really appreciate.
Just get a few of these. I've just got a few more definitions here which we don't have on slides. Peter Giuliano, who's one of Ellie's colleagues, talks about maintaining different standards at different stages of the journey of the bean. Alexandra Melchik, one of our members in Russia, said that specialty coffee is about converting a commodity into a special experience. The Brazilian Specialty Coffee Association have 3 points in their definition: high quality, screen 16 plus, and no defects in the beans. Specialty Coffee Association of Japan talk about excellent flavour in the cup, appreciation and satisfied by coffee drinkers as excellent quality. And I was very interested to hear what you said this morning about the acidic profile of the coffee being really important to the Japanese market. The Specialty Coffee Association of Korea talk about it as a movement with equal sides who are helping each other, that is the producers and the consumers. And along that process, both sides become friends together in the industry. For me, personally, I argue with myself all the time about the definition of specialty coffee, because one thing that is very, very important to me, but nobody else ever seems to mention, is that for me to have a cup of specialty coffee, it has to have just been freshly ground. Because that's one of the most important parts of the process for me. On the other hand, we have a member of our association, which is Nespresso. You have a member of your association, I think, Keurig, who both do
Green Mountain
capsules, who do capsules. Many people in the specialty coffee movement would say that capsules could never ever be specialty coffee, especially because the grinding was done a long time before you actually drink it. However, for me personally, if somebody drinks a good cup of coffee from a capsule, and that person before was drinking instant coffee or very low quality ground coffee, and that capsule takes them on a journey.
Or no coffee.
Or no coffee at all, yes. Takes them on a journey which finally ends up with drinking specialty coffee as we would understand it, then that's perfectly valid, and we could possibly call that capsule specialty coffee. So, I argue with myself. Also, people have said that it's an experience, it's an aspiration, it's an ideal, and these things have come out in some of the points that Ellie was going through. One word which really, for me, should come up in this debate, and that is passion. Once you get that passion in here for specialty coffee, you actually know what it is, even though you can't actually define it.
Well, and so in the context of kind of settling on a series of definitions, a huge universe of definitions, we also wanted to know, so as an industry, how are we doing? If this is what specialty coffee is supposed to be, it's an aspiration, it's a specific standard, it's a movement, it's a community, how are we succeeding at that? How are we providing opportunities to do business and maintain a healthy industry within those definitions? And so we got a range of answers that overall, I could organize them into a number of themes. These items came up a lot. Standards-based was this idea of how well we're doing, the global idea, the community, some of the same types of phrases that came up in the definitions. There was a lot of comment about the price volatility in the current coffee market. The word challenging appeared in about half of the responses. This is my summary word, meaningful. Sort of a lot of people used words that had to do with trying to derive meaning in their everyday business activity. And then finally, of course, a focus on quality. A lot of discussion about how we are doing as an industry, sometimes would mention specific brands. And then finally, this was my sort of favorite part, looking at these responses. The words education came up a lot, that's part of what we're doing well, or part of what we're trying to do, what we're aspiring to do. And then this phrase, this idea that we have a very uneducated consumer. Excuse me. So there was these two things kind of coming up a lot, I thought was really interesting. And just in the interest of summarizing, a big messy set of themes like this, we can kind of summarize them into three general areas which we're going to talk about. One is a global international focus. Number two is a focus on transparency and sustainability. And then number three was this comment about the consumer.
Is it me now?
Excuse me.
Okay, so we're just going to now sort of revert back to, within the context of this, revert back to what we were originally asked to talk about, which is our respective markets, but more briefly than we would have done. And we're not going to really touch upon world markets as such, because Rivera did that very well this morning. So just statistics on the European coffee market. And I'm often asked to talk about the specialty coffee market in Europe as if it's one homogeneous market. It's very, very difficult for me to do that because, as we all know, Europe is made up of a number of countries and many different cultures and languages. So it's very, very difficult to to talk about the market as a whole. So the UK, as an example, is a tea drinking nation, and our coffee history and culture is one of soluble coffee, as opposed to Italy, of course, which we all know has a very, very rich and long tradition of coffee, as do many other countries as well. So it's difficult to talk about Europe as a whole. These statistics that you see here are produced by Allegra, and unfortunately they only go up to 2011. The 2012 statistics are going to be produced and circulated by Allegra next week, so I'm afraid we're a little bit too early to get the up-to-date figures, but I can just give you a flavour of those. So we're looking at these figures at three years, and this is a part of what we look at, and this is branded coffee shops in Europe, and that's 22 countries in Europe that you see here. And you'll see that the UK is leading the way by quite significant amount there. So we have Costa, we have Starbucks, we have Cafe Nero, and we have many other brands as well. Germany is second, and those two countries are way ahead of the rest. But you'll see in most of those countries that there is growth over the 3 years. Not all of them, but most of them there is growth. And whilst the figures are telling us, which ICO produce, are telling us that the overall coffee market in Europe is very, very stagnant and has been for 10 years or more. The specialty coffee market within that is growing. I really wish it was growing by 20%, but it isn't, I'm afraid. 20% is absolutely fantastic. We have a growth of about 3 to 4% per annum in the specialty coffee market. The figures which are going to be produced next week by Allegra are telling us that in 2012 the growth was about the same. They are predicting continued growth in the branded coffee bar market, led by, once again, the UK, but also led by Turkey as well, of all countries. Of course, where the brands follow on the high street in terms of coffee shops, then thankfully for us in the specialty sector, the independents follow also. So we expect to see small growth, 4% in the independent sector over the coming years. So we conducted a survey of our members earlier this year. And those are the responses which we got, which were quite pleasing. And this is one of the questions that we asked and the answers that we got. Of our respondents, we asked them how much of their business is specialty coffee, and it ranges right across from on the left. Some of our members are dealing 100% in specialty coffee, and some of them are hardly dealing at all in specialty coffee. And then there's this bit in the middle. Over to you, sorry.
Okay, so another theme that that emerged when we asked our participants to talk about how we were doing in the industry were these constant themes about a need for transparency and sustainability, or a value on these things. So, of course, one of the things that comes to mind is the coffee leaf rust crisis. You'll hear from Mr. David Pisa tomorrow from Sustainable Harvest. They have their annual event. They had it just a couple weeks ago in El Salvador, and one of the themes of this event was really talking about how are we doing in response to the leaf rust crisis. And so you don't have to really look at these are like super poor quality, because these were just like pictures from my phone of the slides from this Salvadoran social scientist who just sort of presented some of these figures. But even though the photos are pretty poor quality, you can see that the numbers are even scarier. And then another thing that she talked about was just the age of the trees on the plantations. They had noticed, and some more research is needed, but one of the things she mentioned was that Honduras had seemed to be a little bit less hard hit than some of the other countries in Central America, and then they also had generally younger trees. So is there something that we can kind of take away from that in some research? But looking at the age of these coffee plantations, I think this one here is, I think I can't remember what that is. You can maybe even see it. But this, we have quite young trees also in Mexico. And then another item that came up was this idea of the aging population of coffee farmers. She informed us that the average age of a coffee farmer in Central America is currently 53. And that's something that really, as an industry, we need to be concerned about, is that the aging population of coffee farms. And so in addition, of course, even in a year or a year and a half or so where we had 60% or more effect in some Central American countries with the leaf rust crisis, we still have an overabundance of supply. And what that's doing is, and you've heard a couple of the other presenters talk about this, but the oversupply is keeping our market at a low price, and that is creating a very challenging business environment with respect to the cost of production in the origin countries. Maybe in response to both of these things, there's seems to be an emerging interest in Robusta. This is something that I've heard, and I can't really comment on what this means for us, but I do know what people are saying. One of them is that there's this interest in Robusta as a way to diversify coffee farms. Robusta is generally thought of as being, excuse me, more disease resistant. And then finally, there are the emergence of new reports and tools such as the SCAA Green Guides. And these have to do with sustainability at a retail level, focusing on waste, water, and items like that.
Can I just say something? Just that statistic that Ellie just brought up there, that figure that the average age of a coffee farmer is 53, which is really, really worrying. And why is that? Well, the reason is because the young people are leaving the farms and going off to do jobs in the cities. And why are they doing that? Because there is no money in coffee farming. We're not paying them enough. So this is a real problem for coffee farms in the future. And we have to look at our business model, I think, for a sustainable supply chain. The bottom line is that we've just seen there, we demand more coffee, we demand better coffee, but we're not paying the right price to allow the farmers to give us what we want, and this is a real problem that we need to look at. We're just as an aside, just a very small initiative that our association is starting next year is to take 2 young people from Africa and 2 people from Brazil and bring them over to Europe so that they can learn about the coffee industry in the consuming countries, and hopefully we can encourage and motivate and enthuse them to go back to stay in their industry and talk about talk to other young people about the possibilities of staying in the industry. So it's a really, really big problem that we will, I think, be talking about a lot more in the future.
Thanks. And the third theme, of course, was this focus on the specialty coffee consumer. And some of our respondents even talked about the consumer as being, and I think we mentioned this earlier, as being the arbiter of the definition of specialty coffee. They get to decide whether it's specialty, because if they enjoy it and it's what they're expecting as specialty, then it's specialty. About a year ago, about a year and a half ago, SCAA commissioned a series of focus groups and reports about kind of trying to first start by defining the specialty coffee consumer and understanding their wants and needs and their behaviors a little bit more. One of the themes that emerged from this were the consumers that identify themselves as specialty coffee drinkers have a great deal of enthusiasm for specialty coffee, for what they express generally a need to understand sort of where the coffee comes from, and they mean 2 things by that. Number one, they mean where was it grown, what region does it come from, and then also where was it roasted. The brand of coffee is generally defined by the roaster, sometimes by the retailer, but generally our specialty coffee consumers want to know those 2 things specifically. And and maybe not much more, although we certainly have a lot of information that we try to give them. But they come into our cafes sort of wanting this information and being excited about coffee. My personal favorite takeaway from the consumer study, the 2012 consumer study, was this theme that coffee is something that sort of gives you a superpower, that in the morning or whenever you drink it, it's like you don't function like yourself until you have your morning coffee. And this was a very, I know that the morning day part coffee consumption is something that is not necessarily very common here in Korea. These focus groups were in the US. But the idea of activating superpowers. And I think as specialty coffee businesses, if we don't tap into this, we're really leaving a lot up to chance, where we have this population of consumer that says, your product gives me superpowers. I think that we probably want to tap into that. What our industry respondents said over and over again, and also another theme that came up from the Let's Talk Coffee event, was a challenge issued by one of the coffee journalists who really looked at different coffee packaging labels, specifically labels, not even communication style, but all the different information that we tend to put on this packaging. And it was, the consumers are telling us they just want to know where it comes from and what to do with it. And we're giving them all this ancillary information, elevation and variety, and we don't really know, we haven't given them the tools to know why that's important, sort of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And generally, when we do that, we try to, all the things that we're thinking about when we say, how are we doing as an industry? We know that we are trying to communicate that in all kinds of things. So all the different themes that emerged from the state of the industry, we try to cram that into the minds of our consumers every time we interact with them. And you can see that it doesn't take long before you can't even tell. There's so much noise, you can't even tell what it is. And especially this idea of over-education. This was the theme that emerged over and over again, where our members know that they're not communicating appropriately with the consumers. And what's happening is that the consumers don't like it, and they're confused. So they're looking to the association to the various coffee associations to help define that messaging a little bit more clearly. Because we know that a confused customer, what's the theme we always hear, a confused customer doesn't buy. So they're not buying specialty coffee. Maybe they're trying to get some other sort of specialty experience in another industry, craft beer or wine, where the messaging is a lot clearer and the differentiation of something that's specialty and not, or a craft produced item and not, is much more clear. Or maybe they're just not drinking very nice coffee. So we're losing the opportunity to bring these customers who have all the potential and all the interest in specialty coffee. Because we don't communicate with them in the right way, we know that we're losing them. These are
just one point also,
sure, yeah.
Ellie, that survey that you had also, a point came out which the consumer actually doesn't fully understand or really engage with the word specialty or speciality. It doesn't really mean anything to them at all.
Yeah, exactly. There was not a consistent definition. And I think we shouldn't be surprised by that, because we can't even agree. We just took 17 slides to explain the definition of it. So we do know that even though we don't have our messaging quite right, and our industry is telling us we're not doing a good job of this, we do know that there is growth in coffee consumption, and we believe that this also has to do with specialty. These are just some figures from the ICO that have to do with our current percentage of world coffee consumption. And so divided into established markets and ICO producing countries, new emerging markets. And I think that there's a lot to be enthusiastic about these particular slides. We know that consumption is growing in places like India and in Brazil and certainly China.
Yeah, this slide here just shows you what I was saying earlier on, that the top line there is the disappearance that we heard about earlier on this morning. Not particularly important there, but And the bottom line is soluble coffee in Europe, which you can see is as flat as you could possibly get on a graph. And then the middle one for roasted coffee, it's a little bit up and down, but pretty much over the 10 years or so of this graph, it's as flat as you can get once again. It pretty much finishes where it started. So consumption of coffee generally in Europe is static and very sluggish, but thankfully within that the specialty coffee market is growing.
So overall, when we took a look at these different responses from the community in saying, defining specialty coffee and then some comment on how are we doing as an industry, we decided to give it a traffic light, give it a grade. In terms of global and international cooperation, I think most of our members really see that we're doing better than ever. It's one of the reasons that David and I wanted to present this together. We're the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe and of America here in Korea, but really both of us are working with coffee companies all over the world. And through World Coffee events and other programs like that, the opportunities and growth of collaboration are the best they've ever been. And when we have our supply chain that most of the time involves international transactions, I think that we generally all agree that this is important and that the types of new programs that we're doing, like the World Coffee Leaders Forum, lead us to believe that we're actually doing a pretty good job here. In terms of transparency and sustainability, we gave it a yellow light. I think that there's a lot more enthusiasm. I think our membership, our community is not satisfied, although we definitely have seen progress. There's a little bit of mixed results with new tools and new reports and responses to various mandates from the communities, but also there are things like the leaf rust crisis that really just are so incredibly disruptive. They're disrupting people's lives and their livelihoods, as well as the supply chain itself. So we have to look at that as something that we can't really say that we're satisfied there fully. And then finally, the engagement with consumers. This was the area of red light. This was something that we know is a problem, and it's something that we need to develop as a united voice, as a group of collaborative international associations and members. And then now we just wanted to talk a little bit about, so what do we propose to do about that, including what can you do as professional participants in the coffee industry. So let's go ahead and just kind of go ahead and circle back to your original definition of specialty coffee that we asked you to write down earlier. And just kind of think to yourself, we're going to ask you to report out, but would you maybe, after seeing these different ideas and other perspectives, would you change how you would define it, and why would that be? Back to this idea of what do we do, we'd really like to get to a place where all three of those areas are in the green light, or the green arrow. Number one, what can you do to get ourselves to the green light? Continue to support your association. And this is something that, of course, is very easy for me to say as a representative of SCAA. But I think that sometimes the connection between what we want our industry to look like and our support of our associations isn't always made very clear. The association is the logical place to really develop and continue to conduct research that helps us understand the consumer better, or whatever it is. That right now, that seems to be the area where the membership is wanting the most involvement and most direction. And so continued membership and exhibition at events, attending events, and being a good consumer of your association is a great way to make sure that those types of activities can continue. Our associations are certainly known for producing education and also for events, besides these other things like research and reporting. And events, to me, always can be summarized by this idea that they are not necessarily just about an event so that you can have something to do, but it's about developing a community with a specific identity, and then also the networking opportunities. And the real purpose of an association is to help businesses do business together or to improve their business practices internally. And so producing events is what helps us, allows us to do that for our members. And then finally, education has to do with proliferating standards. So then the purpose of it is not to just have a program to go through, but really to proliferate standards in order to gain a competitive advantage in your business. Speaking of those standards, let's all make sure that we can agree to maintain them. Excuse me. We can do all the research in the world and talk about a green coffee standard or even something a little bit more fluid like best practices. But if we don't maintain these standards in our own businesses, they don't really mean anything. And it's important, again, the idea of maintaining standards, it's not to follow rules just for the sake of doing it, but it's for the purpose of gaining a competitive advantage in your business. And then finally, we encourage you to keep communicating with us, keep collaborating with each other. And we know that the way that when we try to communicate and collaborate, one of the things we like to talk about is embracing change, which is another word for that, of course, is innovation. And again, this idea, driving it towards a competitive advantage. Specialty coffee, it doesn't matter if we agree upon a definition if we can't stay in business. And so we definitely want to help facilitate the member companies' abilities to do that and not just survive, but also to thrive.
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting presentation.
감사합니다.
Let's give them a big round of applause.